Welcome to the Surveillance and Student Privacy Rights webinar. This is hosted by the Pomona Student Union in the ACLU of Southern California. My name is Destiny Rivera Gomez. I am a first year at Scripps College, as well as a youth organizer with the Pomona Student Union, and I will be your host today. Before we begin, we want to give some context to you guys about PSU and the purpose of our webinar. PSU is a youth-led social action group of the Pomona-based nonprofit Gente Organizada. PSU consists of both high school and college students who admire Pomona and organize to challenge and dismantle systems of oppression to create an environment for our youth to thrive in. PSU has been organizing around this issue of policing in schools for the last 3 years, and we shifted this year to focus on how policing, technology, and surveillance intersect. With distant learning, many students and families know nothing or little to nothing about digital privacy rights, even though many of us have accepted that our online activity is under surveillance. PSU decided to develop and host this webinar to inform ourselves and our community because these systems of surveillance and policing are changing the way we behave and the way we communicate. So, for today's agenda, we will feature a Know Your Rights presentation, a Q&A, a student panel. So with that being said, I ask that all questions are held until the Q&A portion of our webinar. Thank you. To move forward, I would like to introduce two PSU organizers, Orlando and Arlene, who are here to give us a bit of historical context on the issue we are targeting today to address. I would like to welcome our panelists, Orlando and Arlene.
Hello, folks. My name is Arlene Alonso, and I'm a PSU youth organizer with Gente Organizada, and I'll be providing a brief historical context on how surveillance, policing, and technology have intersected with social movements in the past. And although surveillance seems to be more of a modern-day issue given today's technological advancements, it has roots way back to the civil rights movement. A significant figure in the development and the founding of the FBI was named John Edgar Hoover. He was the FBI director for almost 50 years. And during the 1960s and 70s, when the fear of communism was at an all-time high, Hoover gave free rein to pursue civil rights activists based on the suspicions that communists were infiltrating civil rights organizations in an attempt to overthrow the government. This targeting of groups by the FBI can be seen in today's world. For example, when George Floyd was killed in May of this year by police officer Derek Chauvin, people took to the streets to protest unfair and unjust police killings. As hundreds and thousands joined protests against systematic racism and police brutality, law enforcement used powerful surveillance tools to track them down. Drones flew over protests in Minneapolis and New York. Facial recognition software was being used by some police body cameras. Law enforcement can use signals from our cell phones and automatic license plate readers to follow our movements. And those are just a few of the methods that we're aware of. I'll be handing it over to Orlando, who will be going into detail on how the issue has impacted bio-POC communities and their movements in the past.
Thank you, Arlene. Hello, everyone. My name is Orlando, and I am a PSU youth organizer, chair of the Pomona Youth Commission, and a freshman at Ganesha High School. I will be giving the historical context of policing and surveillance in our schools and how it affects students of color. According to data from the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, Black, Latinx, and Native American students face higher rates of school disciplinary consequences, such as suspension and expulsion, than their white student counterparts. And they are also subjected to interactions with the police and schools in the form of contraband sweeps, interrogations, physical restraints, and arrest. Black students are also most likely to be subjected to social media surveillance and the use of biased artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology. Also, there are currently between 14,000 and 20,000 school resource officers, SROs, nationwide. This statistic does not include security guards, street cops, and other members of law enforcement responsible for patrolling public schools. The presence of these officers has had violent consequences for many brown and Black students of all grade levels, and yet their numbers continue to increase, yet school districts and local governments have prioritized funding for police and surveillance tools that make students feel as though they are entering detention centers and not schools. While none of these methods have been proven to be effective in deteriorating violence, similar systems have resulted in diverting resources away from enrichment opportunities, policing schools, communities to a point where students feel afraid to express themselves and placing especially dangerous targets on students of color who are already disproportionately mislabeled and punished. As someone who lives in a low-income area of Pomona, I do see these difficulties our schools face because our district prioritizes funding for police instead of having resources for homeless, foster, LGBTQ, low income, BIPOC, and undocumented youth. For example, LGBTQ plus students are afraid of searching up info for resources because they are afraid of being harassed by the school districts and the police. Now I'll pass it off back to Arlene.
Thank you, Orlando. Now, in striving for a world in which people feel safe to express themselves without worrying that their identity is going to be targeted or surveillanced, it is important for us to know our rights and our protections. To give us more insight, I introduce to you Ana Mendoza and Jennifer Jones from the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us this evening. I'm Ana Mendoza. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a staff attorney with the Education Equity Project at the ACLU Foundation of Southern California.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Jones. I work with the Technology and Civil Liberties team in the Northern California office. And together with Anna, we advocate for the privacy rights of students and parents in California's public school systems, which includes fighting back against the use of surveillance technology by district administrators and personnel. And a critical part of that advocacy is making sure that students and parents know exactly what their privacy rights are. So we're here today to just give a brief overview of your rights when it comes to digital privacy and what schools are and are not allowed to do when it comes to monitoring student behavior and activity. And just so you all know, there are some parts of our presentation that are interactive. So if you'd like, you can follow us along by going to menti.com, which is listed at the top of the slides, and then using the code 5431066, which you can also see at the top of the slide. And once you're there, you can respond to any questions that be asked during the presentation, and you can leave any comments or reactions to anything that we discussed tonight. So with that being said, I will pass it back to Anna to kick us off.
So just want to verify, can everyone see the screen? Yes. Okay. So where we want to start tonight is just a reminder that when it comes to education technology, a question that we often get is about fees and costs. And so we want to just start off by saying and reminding you all that the California Constitution guarantees students a free public education. And so what does that mean when it comes to technology? We have received a number of questions from students and from families, which we have posted on our website. The link is at the bottom of the screen. And so I've copied some of that information here. So the major takeaways that I want you all to know is that the Constitution does give you all a free public education, meaning that you shouldn't have to pay for any materials that you need to access your instruction. This means that if you need a computer to participate in distance learning because your school has opted to use kind of live teaching as the mode of providing instruction, then your school has the obligation to provide you with your equipment for free. And this means like a laptop or a tablet. And if you don't have access to the internet that you need to connect, this includes something like a hotspot too. If you are given technology and you're finding that it's not working properly, you do have also the right to get access to technology that works, to any kind of instructional materials like books or other materials that you need from classroom that are in good, proper working condition. So if you get a device and it's not working, it's broken, or you otherwise can't connect, always be sure to just communicate with your school so that they can get you what you need. And if ultimately your school refuses to give you something that works so that you can access your class, you have the right to file a complaint called a Williams complaint. And here we have a link here where you can access more information. Finally, another question that we often get from families is, do I have to pay for technology that is damaged or lost? And the answer to this is yes, but with some exceptions. You should always return property. But if, let's say that there's an accident, right, and the screen accidentally breaks, accidents doesn't mean that that you're responsible for paying for it. You're not responsible to pay for what's called like wear and tear, which is just like, scuffs or anything that can kind of happen in a normal course of using the product. If the device is stolen, you don't have to pay. If the device was accidentally damaged. But your school can otherwise charge you if they find that you purposefully damaged the product. So your school should really make a kind of a determination on what's called a case-by-case basis, meaning that they should talk to you or your family about what had happened, try to figure it out. And you shouldn't have to pay for things generally that were accidentally damaged. Also, a related question that we often get is whether schools can charge you a security deposit so that you can get loaned a device as a guarantee that you won't lose it, damage it, or break it. And ultimately, these kind of security deposits also infringe on your rights to free public education.
So now we're going to talk about school surveillance, or how exactly it is that schools are sort of closely watching, monitoring, and tracking their students and what their students do on a day-to-day basis. So nowadays, we're seeing schools utilize a constantly growing number of surveillance technologies to monitor what students are doing, both on campus and online. And typically the justification that schools give for using these technologies on students is safety. They say, for example, that they want to help prevent cyberbullying. They'd like to help stop school violence. They'd like to prevent student self-harm, etc. And while of course we share these concerns and agree that addressing these safety issues is important, we're skeptical of the use of surveillance as an intervention because there is actually no proof that surveillance works. So some of the examples of surveillance that we're frequently seeing in schools include the use of surveillance cameras, which are typically used to monitor physical school campuses. And this includes cameras that you typically see inside and outside buildings, not only at school, but also in retail stores or outside of residential homes. We are also increasingly seeing the use of facial recognition technology. So sometimes schools will equip their surveillance cameras with facial recognition that is able to identify a person by scanning their face. And typically the way that this works is the software will compare an image to an existing database of photos. And that database may include driver license photos, social media photos, passport photos, etc. And then that will be used to identify who the person is. We're also seeing the widespread use of social media monitoring to check what students are posting about online. There's also internet monitoring and filtering, and that's basically used to track which websites students are visiting or even blocking access to sites in some instances. Document and email scanning is also pretty common, and that is used to see what students are writing about on their personal or school laptops, or to see what and who they're communicating with through email. And then now in this moment of online learning, we're seeing a very widespread use of spyware. And examples of spyware include programs that you may have been asked to download or you were required to download in order to participate in online learning. Some brands that we're seeing used quite frequently include GoGuardian and Gaggle. And these programs sort of do all of the things that we mentioned above. They monitor communications through chat and email, and they track the different websites that students are visiting. And if any communication or website is flagged by the software as being potentially violent or potentially obscene, the software will basically alert the school. And then in some cases, the school will follow up with the student or family to see what is happening. So if you use a computer or a tablet that was issued by your school, chances are the spyware may be installed on that device. And in some cases, we're seeing that even if you use your personal computer, but you were asked to download software by your school district to attend classes or to submit assignments, the spyware actually might be integrated into that software as well. And then finally, many schools use electronic visitor management systems. And these systems are basically supposed to prevent unauthorized people from accessing a school campus. These systems essentially keep a record of who's visiting the school. And in some cases, they'll check a visitor's ID against a sex offender registry or some other database. But in doing so, the school is basically collecting a lot of information about who is coming to campus and when. So a question that you may all be asking is all of this normal? And are people aware that this is happening in schools? And the good news is that in the past year, we have seen coverage of school surveillance really increasing in the media and by different advocacy organizations. The New York Times actually recently reported that K-12 school settings have essentially become a surveillance state. And a concern that they highlight that I think is really important is that these technologies are being promoted by tech companies. So the schools and the school districts, they're not actually the ones that are developing this technology. It really is tech companies who are looking to get rich and exploit the fact that schools face a lot of very real social problems that require complex solutions that center the needs of children. So these companies are really pushing these systems in these schools. And when the motive is profit, you should question even more than you probably already are, whether surveillance is actually intended to keep students safe and whether students' best interests are being kept in mind. So on that note, if you take away nothing else from today, we hope you at least take away this message, which is surveillance does not equal safety. And you can say it with me. I can't hear you because everyone is muted, but just repeat the mantra, surveillance does not equal safety. So I'll pause here just to give folks a minute to reflect on everything that we've just shared. Again, if you go to the website menti.com and use the code at the top of the slide, you can participate by just typing in a response to this question. So we'll give everyone about 30 seconds to just quickly type in 1 to 3 words that sort of describe how school surveillance makes you feel. How does your awareness of all these technologies that we've described today make you feel?
So to answer the question, just a reminder to go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen, which is 5431066. Y para los que hablan español, si gustan, también pueden hacer lo mismo, pueden ingresar en esa, usar este código para también escribir en español, cómo es que ustedes se sienten con la vigilancia escolar. Yeah. So a lot of the words that I'm saying popped up are actually concerns that we've heard from other students too. And if you see something and you feel the same way, go ahead and enter that. It's okay to kind of repeat answers.
Yeah, so just definitely want to validate all of the feelings that are being shared here. I think this is definitely the way that you should feel. This technology is really scary. It is very violative and gross. The good news is that there are ways to fight back against it. And that's why we're here to share more about your rights today. So now we're going to turn to the part of the program where we start discussing how you can fight back against some of the surveillance.
Sorry.
All right. So student privacy rights in school, they generally come from both the federal and state constitutions and legislation. At the federal level, you have the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which guarantees our right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. And this is often thought of as a constitutional right to privacy. In terms of federal legislation, there is also the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It's commonly known as FERPA. And FERPA protects the privacy of student education records, and it prevents schools from being able to disclose information about students without the permission of a parent or a student who is 18 years of age or older. And then finally, there is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. And this makes available a free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities throughout the nation. It's a federal law. And it gives them a right to special education and any other necessary related services. And these rights remain regardless of whether you're attending school in person or online. So even if you are attending school online, you're entitled to all of these services and special education. At the state level, student privacy rights come from the California Constitution, which explicitly states that all Californians have a right to privacy. So the good thing about living in California is that it's one of the most privacy protective states in the nation. There's also the California Student Online Personal Information Protection Act. That's a lot of words. And that prohibits educational websites, apps, and other online services from being able to share student data or use student data for targeted advertising that doesn't involve an educational purpose. Here in California, we also have the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this actually gives us rights to our personal data, including a right of access. And that means that you have the right to contact websites or mobile apps and request to see what information they've collected about you. And then you also have a right of erasure, which means that you can ask those companies to delete your data. And in most cases, they have to comply with that request. And then I saved the best for last, which is the California Electronic Communications Privacy Act, also known as CAL-ECPA, which I'll discuss in great detail today, because in some ways this is the most important law when it comes to fighting back against student surveillance. So CAL-ECPA basically prevents any California government body, including public schools, from searching our digital devices. So the government isn't allowed to search our phones, tablets, or laptops unless they've done one of three things: going to a judge to get a warrant, getting our consent, or showing that it's an emergency situation. So what does application of CAL-ECPA look like for students in schools? In school, you basically have the right to keep your cell phone, laptop, or tablet private. And that is even if you are using your phone when you're not supposed to, even if you've broken any of the school rules, even if you've caused any disruption in class by using your phone, and even if your school wants to search your phone to investigate another student. So these are common excuses that we see school administrators and personnel use when they want to search a student's phone or take their phone away. And that is against the law. Under CalECPA, they have to have your consent or a warrant to do that.
So another major takeaway that we want you to walk away with today is that you have a right to keep the content on your computer or your online accounts private, even if the school gives you the technology or the account. Also, your school cannot require you to waive or to give away your privacy rights to learn. So they can't require you to, for example, to consent to a search of your online account or devices at any point, just so that you can be able to access your school email or to access your class during distance learning. So we want to go a little bit into kind of a different form of surveillance, which Jennifer mentioned earlier, which is social media monitoring. And so social media monitoring is when schools, or actually it's when some entity uses a software to scan your social media accounts or your online activity. And when the software identifies that you've used a certain kind of keyword, it sends a flag to the program that something alarming has popped up. Usually these keyword flags are then routed to either a school administrator in the school setting, or sometimes to a school resource officer or a school police department officer. So if your school is using a social media, is using social media monitoring, are they required to tell you? And the answer is usually that it depends. But in California, before a school district or any kind of school entity, public school entity, uses social media monitoring, they're actually supposed to let you and your parents know. They're supposed to give you access to look at the information that they've collected about your students. And you also have the right to delete the information when you leave the school district or when you turn 18. Also, another question that we've gotten a lot is the internet service provided by my school district allowed to block me from viewing certain websites or slow down when I visit certain websites? So the answer is no. Students should be able to view all lawful content and applications equally without interference from internet service providers, again, specific online services or websites. So school districts should supply families with free or subsidized, or school districts that supply families, with free or subsidized broadband access should comply with net neutrality principles by prohibiting providers from controlling what students and families choose to do on the internet.
And this slide basically lays out exactly what net neutrality principles are. And sort of a broad overview is that it means that all content should be delivered equally. So internet service providers shouldn't be picking and choosing what websites families can look at or charging to deliver one service faster or more conveniently than another. And the idea of this really comes down to like the First Amendment right to free speech. People shouldn't be blocked from seeing legal websites or accessing news or information from particular sites. And this is also just to protect against discrimination. So we don't want internet service providers sort of giving favorable transmission to content providers maybe that are affiliated with them, or discriminating against internet services based on the identity of the user. And so this is really what it means for school districts and providers to adhere to net neutrality.
So one of the laws that we talked about that protects your privacy is the Student Online Personal Information Protection Act, or SOPIPA, which is a law that went into effect in 2016 here in California. And so SOPIPA is a student privacy law that limits how ed tech companies that provide technology to school districts actually, it limits whether or not they can, it limits their ability to advertise to you. And it specifically prohibits companies from selling student information or to target students for advertising purposes. And so this is really important because depending on what technology your school uses, they may or may not be complying with SEPIPA. So for example, there's Zoom, and then there's Zoom for Education. And so here we have the ratings from our friends over at Common Sense Media. They have a website where they evaluate different companies that provide apps or software for education. And so here's one example of what happens when a company complies with SEPIPA or not. Regular Zoom, for example, is a product that is marketed to everyone. And so it is not required to comply with SEPIPA. But Zoom for Education, for example, which is used by school districts, is required to comply with SEPIPA. And so with that, they actually are more protective. When you use Zoom for Education, your information and your data is protected more strongly. And also the company won't be using your data to like advertise certain things to you. So if you want to learn more about privacy evaluations, we definitely encourage you to check out Common Sense Media's website, and the link is available here on this slide. So we wanted to give you a few tips to protect your digital privacy. So first, read any agreement that you're given either by a company or by your school before you sign it, so that you know what it is that they're collecting about you, whether or not they can share the information about you, and to kind of understand what it is that they're doing with your information and whether or not they're tracking your activity. We also just want to remind you that anything you post publicly can be seen by anybody on social media or blogs or websites. And this means that the police can see it, ICE can see it, teachers, administrator, and social media monitoring programs pick up information from these publicly available websites. We also want you to be mindful of school policies when you use school-issued devices to access your personal accounts, like your social media accounts, your email, instant messaging programs, or even gaming platforms. And also be mindful when you use school-issued email accounts for non-school communications or setting up accounts like social media. So for example, like think really carefully about whether you want to use your school-issued email account to open your personal Instagram account. And just to give you kind of a sense of why this is important to check out your school's policies and reading any agreements before you sign them, and making an informed decision about whether or not you're going to agree to them, is because school districts sometimes have policies that are not always protective of student privacy in the way that you may want your privacy to be protected. So for example, at the bottom here, this is an example pulled from a policy from Pomona Unified School District on student use of technology, which if you read here, Section 5B says that electronic mail or email is not guaranteed to be private. Messages relating to or in support of illegal activities must be reported to the authorities. It's unclear what the school can deem illegal activities or what they may be reporting to authorities, assuming that authorities means law enforcement authorities. You also have, this also raises a red flag that districts can monitor your communications like your email and then share your information obtained through your email with law enforcement if they deem it necessary. And this is something that you may not consider or take or know about. And so it's always important to check out your school district's policies and know what it is that they're doing and what they're up to. So another way to protect your digital privacy is to minimize the data that's being tracked. So there's an organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they have a couple of apps available to help you encrypt your communications online, and also to block or to kind of block what are called individual trackers, which are kind of programs used by online monitoring software. They also have a specific student privacy self-defense guide. So we put the link here. And if you have a moment and you're interested in protecting your digital privacy as a student, we recommend that you check it out for some more tips on how you can protect yourself and your family when you use technology or accounts issued by a school. So we know earlier, so we have another word cloud that we want you all to kind of participate in. So again, go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen to participate. And so we've talked a lot about surveillance and how it makes you feel. And we know that it can make you feel violated or scared or nervous, and it's invasive. But we also want to know a little bit about how it is that you want to feel in school, right? Do you want to feel supported by your school staff? Do you want to feel listened to, cared for? So we just want to give you all a few moments to also reflect on what it is that your school district should aspire to make you feel like when you're in school or dealing with school staff. Yep. Mhm. Yeah, these are really great responses. Thank you all. This is really great. I totally want to validate everything that everyone has written so far. And we definitely agree that schools should be centers of learning where students and families feel safe and supported and comfortable and like they can trust school staff. We started off in the presentation by saying that a lot of school surveillance technology is not proven to actually lead to school safety, but there is so much research showing that having a positive school climate that includes schools where students can trust the adults actually what increases and improves school safety. And so all of the things that you're describing right now are actually really what schools should aspire to get to. And we hope that by advocacy, we can get there together. So if you want more information, we just want to give you all our contact information. Here our emails are listed here. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. MySchoolMyRights.com is a website where we have information about students' rights in K-12 public schools in California on different issues ranging from cell phone privacy to student expression and free speech. Information for LGBTQ students, parenting students, students with disabilities. And right now, one of our key KYRs that we're promoting is our student rights during the COVID-19 pandemic, which features some of the questions that we reviewed earlier in our presentation. Also just wanted to highlight, sometimes we do get questions about kind of police on campus and surveillance technology. So if you want to know more about your rights or what to do when you're confronted with law enforcement, either in school or in the community, check out our website listed here. And finally, we have our youth leaders, the Youth Liberty Squad, have a petition right now to state leaders asking for care, not cops, asking for schools and our state leadership to invest in mental health supports in schools. So if you have a moment, we encourage you to check that out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Anna and Jennifer, for the presentation. So PSU would also like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all your support. You guys have been attending our PSU meetings on Sunday mornings And all of that means a great deal to us and what we're fighting for and trying to advocate for. So we really thank you for working with us and for, advocating for our community. So it is now time for our panel. Our panel today includes Andrew Miron, PSU organizer and high school senior, Luis Limon Castro, PSU organizer and high school junior, and Yvette Arenas, PSU organizer and high school junior. Our panelists will be sharing their personal testimonies today. So we're going to be starting with Andrew Miron.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, high school student at Diamond Ranch. I want to share my story on how a history assignment got literally half of my class sent to the office. And so this is sophomore year. And sophomore year in Diamond Ranch, we had just gotten Chromebooks available to all students. So what ended up happening is what our school didn't do is they said that we would all be receiving, school issued Chromebooks. Everybody looked at this as good news because this meant that we wouldn't have to be carrying textbooks, we wouldn't have to be carrying notebooks, no papers, no binders, because everything would be online. So now the only thing that we would have to worry about is just taking care of our Chromebooks. So everybody was happy about this, everybody was excited, and that included myself. The only problem was that our school, our staff, nobody gave us forewarning, no one gave us a heads up that we would also be monitored in this process. So we would have no privacy. We found this out the hard way. So sophomore year, I had a world history class, and what ended up happening is we had a school project, and what we needed to do is we needed to research about different time periods and how war affected public health, economy, et cetera, et cetera. Just how overall war affects people. And in the midst of doing research for our projects, I started noticing that my friends from class started being pulled out one by one. And later I found out that they were being pulled out of class to go and be sent up to the office. Reason being was that the school actually has a a head, a director, a head of security at Diamond Ranch, and this man is basically, the guy at the top of the school who is in charge of basically the school safety. And when this guy is the guy who had been monitoring all the students, search history, what they had been searching up, what they're doing, without us even knowing. And so my friends would be called up to the office, go meet up with them. And I quote with one of my friends that said that as soon as he sat down to talk with basically the dean, his question to him was, should we be worried about your search history? You know, Straight off the bat, that was his first question. Should we be worried about what you're searching? It wasn't, there was no question about, is there anything going on? Is there something happening? you know, it was a straight just should be worried about what you're searching up, basically referring to school safety. And that made my friend feel really intimidated because instead of, going up there because, oh, maybe there was a mishap, there's just a misunderstanding, he felt threatened. And as the dean, with his response and his question, that's why he came off. Um, 15 students were pulled out that day out of my classroom. That's half because we had 31 students in our class. So 15 students were pulled out. Um, each and every single student that came back to the classroom, as I noticed, looked rattled. They looked like they did something bad when in reality they didn't. All we were doing is just researching, about the topics that we were given for our project. And later on, I would notice that this would change the behavior of everybody. I would notice that friends and people that I didn't even know of were putting tape over their cameras because, quote unquote, they were saying that they were being watched or that they felt watched. They were saying that they would give warnings to other people that who would say, "Oh, I need to research something for my project." I would hear my friends saying, "Don't search this up on your computer. Don't look this up. Don't go on this website. Don't pull this up, because then you'll be called up to the office." Instead of being understanding of why the school would be doing this, everybody felt threatened. And this wasn't just sophomore year. In junior year, it got worse with more people feeling more and more paranoid. More people putting cameras on, and it went on to people not even using the Chromebooks for school assignments, people started bringing in their own laptops or even using their phone for doing assignments because they didn't feel, safe using their own school computer when our own school would always encourage us to use our computer because it was our tool in order for us to keep all of our files safe, to keep our homework, organized, all of that organized, and that wasn't the case. um, that's my testimony on how surveillance really changed our behavior, and it's how it makes us feel as students. We there was no warning. I would understand if I would have been more understanding if our school gave us some sort of warning saying, make sure that you're on task and that you're doing anything that you're not supposed to because we can see what you're doing. But there wasn't any of that messages, and we ended up finding out that we were being surveilled the hard way, without warning. And the only question that I have to, our school and to our school district is, why is it that when we're trying to do our work that we're looked at as a threat just because of what we researched and not asked if we need resources, if we need information, if we just need education, if that's all around, because all we were doing that day in sophomore year for our history class is just getting information about a time period that we were given. There was no offense done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We will now transition to Luis.
Hello, my name is Luis Casolimon. I'm a junior at Diamond Ranch High School. And what I'll be discussing a little bit more today is regarding a program called NetOp. So, NetOp is a program that teachers use, and the basic function of it is to be able to see what the students are doing on their computers and make sure they're on task. Now, that's just understanding in itself, like to make sure, your students in your class are on task, are doing their work, they're not, playing video games during class, or not doing other stuff that they shouldn't be doing. But I had a situation with one of my teachers in a freshman year. So in freshman year, I was in my English class, and we were working on just the work we had to finish up the class. And the teacher's like, okay, so once you're done with all your work, with all the work for the class today, you can go on and do any work you have for any other class. So I was done with my work, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna work on some stuff for my coding class. And for this class, the assignments that were given to us are more of, I'll give you this website and try to recreate it the best you can, or I'll give you this image and try to recreate it the best you can using the code. So I went into the program. I went into one of my projects that I was working on. And before I could even start to do anything, my screen gets frozen. Now, that's an ability that the teachers have. They can freeze your screen or stop whatever you're doing at that moment. And what the teacher decided to do at that moment was freeze my screen, turn to me in the middle of class, and just out loud just go, "Hey, Luis, what are you doing on that computer? What are you doing?" And I look at this teacher and I'm like, "I'm working on an assignment for this class." He's like, "Sure you are. Yeah, sure." Now, that in itself doesn't frustrate me that, he was concerned of, oh, I was doing some other stuff that I shouldn't be doing. What concerned me was with NetOp, they have the ability to send private messages. What he could have done was, freeze my screen, private message me like, "Oh, hey, Luis, what are you working on? I can't see to understand what you're doing, or I don't understand why you're working on this." I could have explained it very simple. But the fact that this teacher thought, instead of, addressing this with the student, I'm going to call him out in the middle of class, in front of everyone, to get my answer. And that just made me feel like he had no respect for like whatever it's in, no respect for me. And that he felt it was fine to call out this student in the middle of class and put him on blast instead of addressing it and speaking to me. Now, NetOp is an interesting program. It has very simple abilities. He can see your screen, send private messages, freeze screen, do all these things. And it's become more of use, especially during a quarantine, especially when we're at home on our computers all day and we're not in a class sitting. Teacher can't be walking around and seeing our screens. And what I found much more better is during these times is how some teachers use it, because instead of immediately doing that, a good example would be my Spanish teacher. She uses it only when she needs to. She uses it, let's say, if we're taking a test or we're taking a quiz or more tasks like that. What my English teacher decided to use it for was to spy on us and see what we were doing and call out people. Now, similarly to Andrew's story, a lot of people just seeing this happen or experiencing it themselves as students, it changes the way you do stuff. It makes you think for that extra second of, is it okay that I open this website during this class while I have my teacher watching me? Is it okay that I go on this website? And it's just astonishing that this program that honestly, it's really good. It has good intent, but the way that the teachers aren't given a specific training, it's more of like, okay, here's what it does. Use it as you can or use it when you want, is just something that just it brought more attention to me of like seeing how people actually began to act after like they experienced or they saw someone experience. So like when I look back on this, I just think, how many things can teachers get away with using this, or what can they do by using this without anyone else knowing, is more of my concern with that program. But overall, though, that's my 2 cents. That's my personal experience.
Thank you so much, Luis. We will have now Yvette go up and speak.
Hi everyone, my name is Yvette Arenas and I am a junior at iPoly High School. So today I'll be talking about inclusivity and consideration. So students who are part of the LGBTQ communities are especially vulnerable to the damage that can be done through surveillance, because some students may use district computers to learn more about themselves. As you all know or may not know, same-sex education is not really taught in most schools, so it is natural for them to be curious since they are trying to understand who they are. This brings up the question on how they are protected by the schools so their identities won't be in risk. What are school districts doing in order to protect the students that identify themselves with the LGBTQ community or are questioning? This is an important topic to me since I have multiple friends who are part of the LGBTQ community who don't feel like they're safe using the internet since most of them have school computers and they don't know if the school will be able to see what they are searching on the internet. My friend, she doesn't use her birth name since they do not identify with the name gender. They often have to remind our teacher not to call them by their name they identify with since their parents do not know about how they identify. This also brings up my concern that if the school can see what the students search up, and what prevents their searches being brought up to the students' parents that do not know their child identifies with. If the school were to bring up the search history of the students to their parents, that's taking away their right to tell their own parents on how they identify. If that were to happen, it would be very hard on the student if their parents do not accept them. It is my understanding that some school districts do not take or do not even take any of this into consideration, but they justify surveillance as keeping kids safe. So, how are schools helping these students that are part of the LGBTQ community feel comfortable and safe in their own homes and during school hours?
Thank you so much to our panelists. Shout out to them, actually. We thank you for sharing your lived experience and perspectives with us. We appreciate each one of you and the work you guys do for PSU. Thank you. So now we have reached the Q&A portion of our agenda. We will have Anna and Jennifer from ACLU fielding questions along with PSU youth organizers Mario, Juliana, and Arlene. So I will now invite Jesus Sanchez to come and ask the questions that he will be directing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Destiny. Our first question is for our friends at the ACLU, so Jennifer and Anna. It's a series of questions that are related. So here we go. Hi, are social media monitoring programs able to see what private account posts or only the public accounts? And connected to that question as well, let's see, how does social media monitoring work? As in, how does the school know which social media accounts are from their students? So Anna, Jennifer, I'll hand that question to y'all.
Sure, I can kick us off. So typically social media monitoring software is only able to see what posts are public. As a general rule, that's usually the way that it works. The one exception that I think applies to students in the K through 12 context is that if you use a school issued email to sign up for your social media, in that case, most likely the school district would be able to see even your private posts and your private communications. So that's one of the reasons why we really caution against using a school issued email to sign up for any of your social media accounts. In terms of how social media monitoring works generally, typically the way that we see it used is that software will be trained to identify and look for certain words or phrases that are being used and posted on social media. How exactly schools are able to pinpoint whether their students are using, I'm not exactly sure. Anna may be able to weigh in here. I would imagine though that it searches for certain keywords and then probably adds additional filters that pinpoint people within a certain location, or maybe who have even identified on their social media accounts that they attend a specific school. But Anna, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think Jennifer's totally right. I have actually been in a meeting where the school police from one school district said that they use social media monitoring and they use geofencing. So they identify a certain radius around a school, and then they set up different filters to kind of figure out like if anything is related to school activity. So even if you're not a student, but you mentioned the local high school down the block from you in your post, the monitoring program will capture the information from that post. Also, just remember that your schools have access to your names and your email addresses or anything else you supply to them. So sometimes they can use this information and upload it to any software that they use.
Thank you, Anna and Jennifer. We have another question for the both of you. This one comes from Carlos Carrillo, and he's asking, I have a student whose cell phone was taken away during a marijuana-related investigation. The school staff viewed content that resulted in suspension of the student. What can his parents do in this case?
So it depends on how long ago that was. But let's say, for example, that this is a situation that a student is in. Just a reminder that under CalACPA, as Jennifer explained, you don't have to turn over your cell phone and you don't have to consent to a search. To the extent that the school gets the phone, searches through it without the student's consent, any information that the school obtains through that illegal search should not come into play in any kind of disciplinary action. If it is, you should be able to challenge it perhaps through a due process hearing or some other type of hearing to make sure that the evidence is suppressed. CalACPA gives you a legal remedy that one can go through as well. Jennifer, I don't know if you want to kind of explain the court remedy.
Yeah, so under CalACPA, there is a suppression remedy, which means that if there is any evidence that's obtained illegally, it cannot be used in a case against you. So if an officer searched the phone without consent and without getting a warrant, that is information that is obtained illegally. And so it wouldn't actually be able to be used in a criminal trial.
Thank you, Anna and Jennifer. One more very important question for y'all. How can these rights be enforced? So privacy rights, how can they be enforced? If you're a parent or student or community member, what can you do?
I mean, I think a good first step is the public education piece, which is what we're doing tonight. So just making sure that students, parents, and families are aware that they have these rights so that they can work on enforcing them. There's a number of different things that you can do. Oftentimes what we find in the K-12 student context is that a lot of schools aren't necessarily aware that they're supposed to comply with all of these different privacy rights. And so in that case, oftentimes we'll write advocacy letters or file complaints on behalf of students that put the schools on notice that they need to adhere to these privacy rights. So that's one way that we do enforcement.
I'll also add that students also can file a complaint with their school if their privacy is violated. And so we have information on our website, myschoolmyrights.com, on how to file a complaint with your school, usually through what's called the Uniform Complaint Procedures, or UCP. It's known as a UCP complaint. And you can file a UCP complaint for any violation of a state or federal law. And so you could technically file a complaint there. And if the violation is a violation under the federal FERPA law, then you can file a complaint also with the U.S. Department of Education.
And if none of those options work, suing a school district in the worst case scenario is always an option. So it's definitely good to try the other forms of advocacy first, just to make things easier. But eventually, if you do need to consult with an attorney and potentially consider litigation, that is something that could be done as well.
Thank you, Anna and Jennifer. The next question is for PSU Youth Organizer Arlene. So the question states, why did PSU start looking into this issue? What motivated this work? And yeah, if you could share a little bit on that, Arlene.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the question. So on September 16th, 2015, Christian Aguilar, who was 16 years old, was unjustly beat by Pomona PD at the LA County Fair right here in Pomona Fairplex. That started a movement. It started conversations going, showing violence, against our youth. That could have been one of our own PSU students. He's only 16 years old. So within PSU, one thing we do is we hold space for one another, and we have these dialogues and these hard, difficult conversations. And so as we started looking into policing and control in general, a question that got brought up was now, okay, what is the role of police on school campuses? And going along with that, we started going ahead and doing research. We started kind of like investigating what's going on within that. And then COVID hit. And now one thing what happened with COVID, it's not that policing stopped, it just shifted. Now it's shifted onto online and web surveillance. And that is why we started going ahead and looking into this.
Thank you, Arlene. Perfect. Next question is for, I'm going to give this to Anna and Jennifer. Let's see. In reference to the data that school districts or these software companies collect, so won't the data they've collected most likely have been backed up? How do we ensure that the backup data is also deleted?
That's a really good question. So I mentioned earlier when I was discussing the California Consumer Privacy Act that there is a right to erasure under that legislation. And that means that you can contact a company and find out what information they have about you and request that they delete it. Companies that are bound by the California Consumer Privacy Act, they know that they have to also delete the backup data as well. A lot of them have actually changed their policies when it comes to backups to make that feasible to do. So what we see now a lot is that companies are constantly doing new backups. because they have to do a new backup every time they go in and delete someone's information. So if you do request deletion under CCPA, you can be fairly assured that both the data and the backup are being deleted as part of that request.
Thank you, Jennifer. The next question states, can the teachers make us turn on our camera? Or can they tie our grade to turning on the camera? So I guess kind of a cameras on off related to grading policy. And I'll, Anna and Jennifer.
Sure. Can I share my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is a great question and one that we have gotten quite often during this pandemic. And so hopefully you can see my screen, but the answer to this question is really, it depends. So schools may have policies that require you to turn on your camera when your teacher asks you to do so, but you may be hesitant for a number of reasons. For example, I saw the policy of one specific school that said you have to have your camera on, but no one is allowed around to be around you. And the family, you know, they share a home, everyone's home, and they're like, look, I'm gonna get in trouble because everyone's home and people are gonna show up in my background. So whatever is your situation that makes you hesitant to turning on your camera, we definitely encourage you to speak to your teacher or to a counselor or someone that you trust at your school to ask if you can have an exception and explain why. Generally, you do have some privacy rights that come into play when classes are recorded or club meetings are recorded. When there's a recording on file, you know, it shows students like your faces, or like it can clearly identify you. Schools have to take steps to protect the privacy rights of the students in the recording. And so then FERPA may come into play, which is the federal student privacy law that applies to your records, and videos can be parts of records sometimes too. So even if they are recording your class, just make sure that you can ask what steps they're taking to ensure your privacy is protected when they record you. Kind of the other pieces too that we just want to remind you is that if your school is using Zoom, for example, not Zoom for education, or your school is using regular Zoom and there's no contract in place governing how regular Zoom is going to use your information, then your privacy comes into play. Because when you use kind of regular consumer products for education, they're not taking the steps that companies that target schools have to take to protect your data. So like under SPPA, for example. So if that's the case and you want to safeguard your privacy, you can tell the school, no, because I don't want to turn on my camera because I don't want my data out there, and the program that you're using doesn't protect my information the way that California student privacy laws would otherwise protect me. And if the school continues to say, no, you have to use this or you're going to get in trouble, then you can technically file a complaint against your school with the Department of Education, or even with our California Department of Education. Because as we mentioned during the KYR, a school cannot force you to waive or give away your privacy rights to participate in your educational program. So that's a lot. There's no straight answer. The answer is really, it depends, but these are some tips here on our website for you to check out. And the link is at the top, myschoolmyrights.com. And this is from our student rights during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have this in Spanish, which we can email out to you all when the materials go out.
Thank you, Anna. And this will be our last question before we close out here. And I'm going to encourage everyone to stay on. We're going to launch a poll as soon as we're done here with our Q&A. So the last one is also for Anna and Jennifer, and it states, why do you think the reason is school districts do not inform students or families of their tech rights?
It's also a very good question. I think that this question really goes to the culture of criminalization that we see in public schools nationwide. where students are sort of treated with a very high level of suspicion, and schools play a role in trying to control and punish students rather than promoting a healthy environment of learning and care. So when it comes to tech, and we see this both in and outside of the school context, these technologies are most powerful when people don't know that they're being used against them. Because if you don't know that they exist, then you can't refuse to consent to them, or you won't change your behavior knowing that you're being watched and spied on by these technologies. So I think that is probably the reason why districts don't inform students of their rights, because if the goal is to really be able to monitor and control students as much as you can, it requires a level of ignorance of not knowing that these technologies exist or what your rights are for them to do what they're designed to do.
Thank you, Jennifer and Anna. I will turn it over to Destiny to close us out, and I'm going to launch the poll for everyone to respond to. Destiny?
Thank you so much to our Q&A panelist. So before we close, please take 1 minute to complete the poll that should have appeared on your screen. There will be 4 questions, and I can say them for you. 1, did you learn something about your state and federal digital privacy rights? The answer selections are yes, no, or I am not sure. 2, are you concerned about the impact of surveillance on student behavior? 3, do you feel school districts do enough to inform students and parents regarding their rights and surveillance? And 4, did you find this webinar useful and informative? Please take a few seconds to fill this out. Okay, to our Pomona folks in the audience, please expect the Pomona Students Union to champion on this issue this year. We are dedicated to learning more about the issue, but most importantly, ensuring that student privacy is being honored. Thank you to ACLU, PSU, Padres Unidos de Pomona, and the Gente staff for their support. And thank you for attending our webinar. We hope you learned something. If you want to do more, there are ways to get involved. So all you have to do is contact us through our website, genteorganizada.org. Thank you and good night.